Okay, I think we can get started probably, right? Is that right, William? Okay. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Nate Ming Curran, and I'm going to be the facilitator for this, our last session, our last panel of the day. We have three really great presentations coming up. I think what we're going to do is I'll introduce each of our speakers individually briefly before their talk. And then, of course, we'll have a chance after the presentations for a really great conversation. And I think what will work best is if we follow what we did in the last panel with Professor Ledergaard. So I'll ask each presenter to stay under 30 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for one or two questions immediately after the presentation if people have pressing questions. And if not, then we'll move through, and once we finish all three presentations, then we'll be able to have our conversation at the end. So I think we should just start then. We have Dr. Esterina Nervino here, who is an assistant professor in English and marketing at City University. And Dr. Nervino will be talking to us about EGS and glam. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Curran, for your introduction. So as you mentioned, I'm going to be talking about both linguistics and marketing within the same presentation. But first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. William Fang, for inviting me back to the university where I actually completed my PhD. And I'm very happy to see so many familiar faces, so people that they've also contributed to the completion of my studies. So I'm really honored to be here. And I actually did my PhD with the founder of this research center, Professor Winnie Cheng. And it was really fascinating for me working on the adoption of corpus tools and multimodal analysis at the same time. So in the presentation today, I will be referring to my PhD thesis, but also sharing with you some of the studies that I conducted with colleagues in the marketing field, some reflection done while I was working in the private sector, and a new project I've been working on for a few months. So any comments and suggestions is more than welcome. As the title of my presentation explains, I'm going to be looking at the discourse shared by luxury brands and how they actually transform this call towards environmental, social, and governance claims into their rhetoric to promote their own goods. Of course, there is a lot of discussion in relation to this topic about greenwashing, but also corona washing. Is not the real topic for this presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any question about it later on. An overview of the presentation for today. So I will be talking about what are the communicative themes emerged in the past few years and then amplified during the pandemic crisis and still relevant in today's reality in the luxury industry. So somehow referring to what the topic for this event post-COVID may actually entail. What are the discursive practices emerged in the luxury industries in reference to specific times, so pre-COVID, but then COVID, and if we can call 2021 and 2022 a post-COVID era. And then ultimately how those discursive practices, they actually enact this resignification of what luxury is in a post-COVID world. Two main transformations that I will be mentioning and illustrating through different texts are digital transformation and sustainability transformation. Both of them have been somehow accelerated by the pandemic, and I will be explaining how actually COVID-19 somehow it acquired a positive attribute in terms of business. If we think about the discourse and the narratives in the media about the pandemic, we have definitely seen it being defined pandemic crisis, economic crisis, social crisis. At the same time in business, very often there was this new narrative of turning crisis into opportunities. So by adopting this approach, we have seen the emergence of those buzzwords and terms such as pandemic is a wake-up call for climate change, is a wake-up call for social inequality, is a catalyst for change, is a catalyst or accelerator for digital transformation. It's somehow a sounding board for businesses. So the businesses that were actually authentic and able to be flexible and agile and adapt to new situations were able to survive. And somehow we've also explored the fragility of globalization and this rediscovery of neighborhood and localization of the messages. If we think about this post-COVID era and what we are moving forward, hopefully, and what we will bring with us in terms of communication, is what Soumya mentioned earlier, this great importance and relevance that communication got during the pandemic. And that will definitely stay with us. This new definition of workplace, and we had like great presentations earlier, redefining and attributing this idea of workplace, discussing remote working, deployment of virtual environments, but then at the same time, new leadership styles, and at the same time, environmental, social, and governance, more specifically, as three of the themes that we have been seeing pervading communication across different sectors, and ultimately diversity and inclusion. In terms of private life, we have also observed some more, if we want, reprioritizing areas such as health and well-being, but also this YOLO culture, very popular among new generations. The rationale behind this study, and again, why studying luxury and also why looking specifically at sustainability and luxury. First of all, because before the pandemic, luxury sector was one of those sectors that, regardless any crisis, was able to maintain quite a financial stability. At the same time, we looked at luxury as a new industry that actually became an industry on its own after the Second World War. There is an intrinsic relationship between luxury, finance, and geopolitical order. And when I talk about luxury, I tend to work within the space of fashion because it's deeply intertwined with culture. At the same time, as a linguist, in the luxury sector, there is a great importance of discourse. Actually, communication is the way that this symbolic capital and prestige is created. And discourse is actually the means to create distinction among brands, products, and create this positioning as luxury brands differentiating from other segments. Therefore, there is also, in particular, relation to sustainability, this idea that there is a paradoxical relationship, because if we think of luxury, it's something that we don't need, unnecessary. It requires overconsumption to generate profit, which goes against what sustainability is professing, which is a conscious consumption. And at the same time, this idea that luxury is a social construct, and it indicates and it signals social certification, versus this call to use luxury actually to somehow draw attention to social inequality and potentially solve it. At the same time, and by the end of this talk, you will see some examples, there is this new, if we want, discourse about sustainability leadership, and somehow the luxury industry, more than other sectors, is able to influence people, consumers unknown, future consumers, engage greater testimonials, and at the same time is seen as an aspirational area to move towards. So also other companies, they look at luxury brands to somehow emulate what they are doing. If we want to define luxury, and it's a common knowledge in marketing that this specific concept is actually very much influenced by time and space, but is also a very subjective one. If we think about the common features that any definition of luxury would have, it entails exclusivity, rarity, uniqueness, timeliness. And we see that basically the text constructed around the idea of luxury, they have conveyed this message through time. These are images of, if we want, texts of the past that were defining luxury. But today we have other texts of our times that actually indicate what luxury is. Because at the end of the day, again, how do we know there is luxury? It's about the discourse that is constructed around it. And on purpose, I included one picture that for those ones based in Hong Kong, you will recognize is Canton Road, but it's actually an old picture. So stores that are no longer there, because something that happened during the pandemic was also this, if we want, change in the retail landscape. And Dr. Simon Harrison from CTU has also a study on how luxury itself redefines the landscape. And if we want to think about the importance of discourse in luxury, I think that the very famous advertisement, "A Diamond is Forever," clearly explains the power of discourse in defining the segmentation. And then again, I mentioned that one of the key phenomena during COVID, or better, that started earlier but definitely were accelerated, is digital transformation. So here we move from the text from the past to the text of today. Luxury is on social media, even though there was a little bit of reluctance because the features of the internet, they didn't clearly match with luxury. Very recently, I would say what we can call a post-COVID-19 area, we have seen the emergence of terms such as metaverse and NFT. We have seen digital goods being sold for much more than physical goods, and here my interest in digital ownership. And then again, the intersection with video games and these new fashion shows on the metaverse that Jane Lockwood mentioned earlier this morning. So we have this idea that luxury, from being something for the happy few, is actually more and more becoming something for the happy many. And then if we think of luxury and digital transformation, we can see that brands, and here again, this is the use of luxury more of as a case study, but what happens in this sector, it also happens in other sectors. We have seen the emergence of the use of digital tools for communication and marketing. And across different years, you see that actually I've labeled adapting from Lee 2015, but also from my previous studies, the different stages of landing of luxury brands and again, other brands on social media in the digital world, till 2022, when we can talk about a way of being comfortable in digital communication, and even a quite fast adaptation to metaverse games and NFT. So we see that from an earlier consideration of channel, this new channel as a conflict towards the definition, then there was a stage where the channel was seen as an opportunity and definitely became a need for survival during the pandemic. And now we are looking at the use of different channels in this harmonized way. But if we want to combine the definition of luxury, what happens in terms of features, and then again influenced by time and space, what we could see is that we have a sort of evolution of the concept. And what happens in COVID-19, I hope I can give you quite a few features that actually have redefined luxury after the pandemic. The way I'm looking at discourse and the intersection with the concept of luxury is in a way that basically combines what Cap Ferrer and Valette-Florence, two major scholars in luxury studies, and Hogenkreis and Kresen-Maluen in the respective years in social semiotics explain about the importance of the medium and the consequence of choosing one medium over another. This idea that different media have a different degree of interactivity, a different discourse production and therefore distribution, and then definition of luxury, because while we are looking at the production and distribution of discourse, that actually matches and redefines the concept that is perceived by the consumers. So again, we could see that while moving from a pre-internet media where it was mainly of a top-down approach, towards social media that we consider a bottom-up approach, given that user-generated content actually frames and reshapes communication from brands as well, we can see that we have moved from a brand-centric approach towards a customer-centric approach. And nowadays, with this emergence of different communities enabled to enact different discourses, the brands need to consider communities as a whole and not only, if you want, a personalized approach. And here it comes this idea that also the narratives about ESG and sustainability, they have moved from a top-down text, so from annual reports, from websites where there is no interaction and opportunity to give comments, towards this idea that the sustainability narratives, they need to be circulated on social media. Why? Because nowadays it's of interest of customers. They have been exposed to this narrative and they are trying to change the way that businesses operate. And here, indeed, during the pandemic, we have seen the emergence of, for the very first time, social media posts that actually engage with sustainability narratives. We have seen different CEOs taking the lead in discussing the potential of luxury goods, of changing the way that the different sectors work, and at the same time raising awareness about what are the difficulties in changing the way that businesses operate. Those are the new texts of our times, and those are the new texts of our times that define what luxury is. Media, of course, pick up any actions and discourse shared by the different companies, and we have seen that this discourse makes sure that luxury being gold in terms of resignification then becomes something green and more attentive to sustainability. And during the pandemic, we have seen that the discourse, the environmental discourse, has become more and more prominent, but at the same time, we have seen the emergence of a social issue discourse, which actually focuses on different social movements that we have seen during the pandemic. Different studies that I've conducted, they've actually looked at sustainability. Then I've also explored this kind of shift towards corporate social responsibility, and now environmental, social, and governance. The three terms, they indicate different areas of action, even though particularly in the media, they have been often used interchangeably. One study that I conducted when I was still working in the private sector was actually looking at reports to start with, and that was a corpus linguistic study published in a journal of marketing. And together with colleagues in marketing, we have looked at how companies, they claim a sustainability conduct, and then through language we could observe that there is actually a more romanticized approach to the narrative, because while sharing the annual reports on the website, the expectation is that conscious consumers will also consume these texts and not only shareholders. We have done a genre analysis, and we have looked at the different moves in those annual reports. It was a corpus of 250,000 words. We have adopted W metrics. So we looked also at the semantic fields and the different functions that actually those semantic fields were enacting. The main findings, they actually looked at how those luxury conglomerates were constructing the idea of sustainability in a way that could be perceived as integral part of the business. Then I also looked at the presence of sustainability discourse in a corpus compiled in 2015. There was only 0.8% of the post giving content about CSR, so maintaining this idea that in the past, sustainability discourse was relegated to websites and annual reports where the users cannot give any comments. Then in 2018, there was another corpus compiled with 645 Instagram posts this time of one brand only Stella McCartney, to be more precise, because he was the one considered most sustainable. And then we looked at 149 different posts to look at sustainable discourse, mainly dedicated to environmental aspect. And then with colleagues in marketing, we used the semiotic study of those posts to actually build an experiment and verify whether consumers were actually more appealed much more from a product that would make them feel guiltless in purchasing. Then we continued our study because we actually saw that different brands were enacting sustainable discourse, in particularly because of corporate pressure, increased activism, engagement on social media, and also the potential damage on reputation. Another study that is the one that I'm conducting in these months actually collected 337 Instagram posts from 9 different luxury brands. And this corpus, it actually represents 8.5% of the posts shared by those brands in 2020. So for a total of almost 4,000 posts, 337 posts talk about ESG engagement. I adopted a social semiotic approach, and while I tend to work on mixed method studies, these particular findings will more looked into a qualitative study. I keep using a methodology that I developed for my PhD thesis, and I tend to work around marketing theories that I can implement particularly at the first stage of analysis. I use UAM to annotate the data, even though some of the annotation needs to be done manually to ensure quality. This is a study that actually looks at the corpus specified in 2020 and 2021. These are the major themes that we have annotated. So we can see that the one highlighted in pink, they are actually the top 5 in terms of frequency, and they have a frequency of 27%. Of course, we haven't presented percentages because there are a lot of overlapping themes. So we are considering utilizing another type of software, MaxQDA, to make sure that we can have a more attentive annotation and display what are the overlappings. We have also seen that for the overlapping themes that we have identified, we have story, time, and self that actually reflect past discursive practices, but also future ones that will be maintained for the social media. And at the same time, we have also observed how the consumers or users have replied towards those posts. So in a corpus of 450,000 tokens, what we have seen is a positive sentiment towards the post, which actually includes solidarity, so reflecting what we have seen in the posts themselves, evaluative language while focused on the product, and then engagement of other users to refer the post through medium-specific features. What will be carried out in 2021 and 2022 from the observation that we have seen of themes replicating what has been done in 2020, definitely climate crisis or use of specific dates such as the 22nd of April as Earth Day to recall themes about natures, social with different campaigns launched by brands against gender-based violence, and then again support of diversity and inclusion, and at the same time specific cause. Here we can see that the brand starts acting as a sort of brand activism itself, and this is one of the themes that I've been exploring by collecting more data. This is actually a sub-study conducted on a few posts collected. So the interesting part about this project is that while looking at the data set, there are then some specific posts that include other searchable talks. So in a way, while looking at climate change and environmental crisis, there are some posts that actually build a sort of dialogical relationship between different genres around the same media event. Like in this case, this is a study that I presented last week at a conference. and basically looks at sustainable leadership and how to use social media to actually engage boards into the discussion. And then in terms of diversity and inclusion, so more towards the social dimension, there are other types of campaigns launched in 2021 and 2022 that are related to those issues that emerged in 2020. And this paper will be presented in a conference in June and looks at this idea of diversity and inclusion and how to embed it into brand messaging to become part of advertising. In terms of conclusion, and just to think about the three different areas that I presented as an overview, first of all, COVID-19 is also an opportunity to look at COVID-19 as a catalyst for digital transformation and change. There is a new rhetoric of newness, particularly in the luxury industry, where features such as exclusivity, uniqueness, and rarity are actually replaced by innovation, technology, and sustainability, or if we want even more specifically, environmental, social, and governance. The content in terms of discursive practices is actually pervaded different media and genre to address the user's demands, constructing this leadership through searchable talk, and using this sort of crisis response and integrate it into the new communication. And then again, something that has emerged from the corpora is actually, and it's reflected in the new manifestos published by conglomerates and brands, is this idea that luxury has been redefined. Current work in progress studies, I've been looking at those themes that you can see in this slide because they particularly emerged from the analysis of the data set I've been investigating. And at CTU, while working in two different departments, of course, I'm trying to bridge the gap between what is the business communication that actually students are exposed to in marketing departments, College of Business, and then in which way do we treat it as applied linguists. But at the same time, I also have the opportunity to collaborate with companies, and watch out because in September, we will be releasing a report with KPMG where actually we analyze how luxury is perceived by consumers and the role of discourse and particularly ESG and digital transformation. These are the implications for the study that for the sake of time, I won't be discussing right now. These are selected references and thank you very much.